P2 and F4, you get this, so on and so on. So they're measuring in all of these places. Each of these are the kind of analog representations, and each of these include all of those wavelengths which have to be teased out. So the two general approaches to neurofeedback training are to train specific frequencies at specific sites. For example, there's a device that has now been recognized by the FDA for diagnosis of ADHD that involves measuring the ratio of theta and beta at CZ, which is about here on your head. And so one of the approaches, and the one recognized by American Academy of Pediatrics as being equal to pharmacology in terms of effectiveness, involves retraining specific wavelengths at a specific place. I don't do that. I'm a little queasy about doing that. To me, that seems a little too intrusive. The approach is based on taking a QEEG or clinical EEG, so we measure all of the sites, all of the frequencies, and we get some prescriptive approach from that. So this is more directive as far as I'm concerned. The big advantage to doing a QEEG is people are usually really motivated to do better so they don't have to put the stupid cap on their head again. That produces a result that looks like this, which shows various levels of activity at various locations. And some practitioners will say that this is prescriptive, and this should guide what we do in terms of approach. The other approach, the one that we subscribe to, might be better characterized as fitness training for the brain. And the Othmer group are the ones who have championed this approach. They are the ones, after my initial research, when I finally convinced my colleagues it was okay for me to do this 7 or 8 years ago, that I decided to pursue. And what is happening at this point is that the rest of the field is just kind of quietly coming in line with the Othmers. And I decided to adopt their approach because they were guided by clinical evidence. They had a bunch of people they were doing neurofeedback with, motivated by son Brian and the Brian Othmer Institute and all of that, and they collected data, and what they found was all of the people who were reporting on what the most effective frequency range were all piled up down at the bottom of the frequency range. So instead of that, you know, sensory motor rhythm and all that stuff that's way up here, they all piled up down at the bottom. So they trained a lot more down at the bottom, and not only that, they invested a boatload of money and time and energy in developing new hardware and new software that would allow them to go even lower still. And all of the data piled up at the bottom again. And so they did the same thing, and these are, you know, intervals of 3 to 5 years, and now there's starting to be more distribution. Many of the people we train now are training at 0.1 millihertz, a 10,000th of a hertz, not 12 to 15 hertz, a 10,000th of a hertz. How in the world any information can be communicated on a wavelength that long, I do not know. But that's the one that seems to be most beneficial for most people. And then they also do something called alpha theta training, which I'm not going to talk about too much today. It's kind of deep state training that happens to be really useful for, in particular, people with post-traumatic stress disorder. The Othmers have a program where they offer free services at military installations across the country to people who have had, you know, difficult military experiences, including a couple of big Marine sites in California. So what does a training session look like? How do we operate this? We prefer to do 2 a week or more. They're 30 to 45 minutes on machine connected up each session. Initially, we work to identify what is the optimal reward frequency, or the frequency at which the individual reports the most benefit. And people who are, you know, adolescents, adults can usually identify changes in state within a session. They will tell you, no, that doesn't feel as comfortable to me. or I feel a little pressure right here, or all kinds of odd little things, or people who come in with a headache, very often we can chase the headache away in the time that they're there. This is much more difficult with kids, particularly those kids who are like 100 miles an hour all the time. We might slow them down to 95, but there's really not a discernible difference between 100 and 95, so we tend to rely more on between session reports. We typically start at the temporal lobes, which is most likely to benefit instabilities, right? A lot of instabilities involve the wrong kind of communication between the hemispheres. Seizures, for example, involve the hemispheres getting too cooperative kind of and sort of building intensity on themselves. Migraines are kind of like little seizures. Or parietal lobe, which is a lot of motor function back here, and that tends to calm people down. I have had parents call me later in the evening, their kids reporting, yeah, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. Parent calls and says, my kid's like he's sedated tonight. That's great, can you do that again? And then we add sites as we go along. So, I'm going to just show you just a brief little snippet here of what a session might look like. Yeah, that one.
Neurofeedback session starts with putting electrodes on the head to measure the brain waves. Nothing goes into the brain, but
This
we're
is
measuring
Sue
what the
Othner
brain's already
talking.
doing. And then we use those brain waves to drive the video game, which is the feedback to the client. For example, with inner tube, when the brain is achieving the goals that we set, then the rocket ship accelerates, makes more exhaust, which is a reward. If your brain goes off in the wrong direction, then a black fog comes in and obscures a tunnel.
So we're finding these ways of twisting the arm of the brain, if you will, to get it to react and do our bidding. And it's that, the push on our part and the push back on the part of the brain that affects then the gradual learning process by which the brain learns to behave better.
From day one of my sessions in neurofeedback, my headaches have started to decrease. I mean, it started to happen right away.
So this is a skill that the brain learns. And of course, once it's learned it, it's going to hold on to that and use it every day so it won't forget. We start to see change rather immediately with neurofeedback. It has some impact within the first session or the first few sessions. Then we like to think in terms of 20-session blocks, because 20 sessions is enough to get a significant measurable change, and at that point there's a decision to be made of whether to go forward or whether we're done.
Okay, so we assess state change within a given session. We assess changes that occur between sessions, and that guides us in how we're going to build a program going forward. Change is generally incremental. A lot of times with pain we'll get, and migraines, headaches, we'll get some effect fairly quickly. But the fact is we don't want dramatic change quickly. We don't want to impose change. We're relying on the brain to affect its own change, so the changes tend to be incremental. And very often it takes a while for people to go, that's different. And I listen for what I refer to as eyebrow-raising moments. When somebody will come in and say, I looked at my husband and we raised our eyebrows because the kid did this. This child who has heretofore not known that we exist went and got my coat for me and brought it to me because he thought I might be cold. Or this person slept through the night without jumping out of bed 18 times to come talk to us about whatever their active fear was. I was telling Aaron earlier that some of these things are difficult for us to quantify. And I told him about an experience I had with a mom about, 6-8 sessions in. This is a kid who's on the autism spectrum, not sleeping well, intensely anxious, and just kind of what you would expect in terms of being a little socially distant. And, you know, the kid's running in the other room and, hooked up, and, you know, so I sit down with the mom and I said, so, you know, how we doing, 6 sessions? And she starts to cry. Oh, no, you know, I'm totally in the wrong direction here. She said, I feel like I'm getting to know my daughter for the first time in her life. I have no idea how to quantify that, but I know that's the kind of stuff that keeps me going, and it keeps me trying to figure out how to do a better job of what I'm doing. I wasn't able to do that before. I don't know another way to do that doesn't involve, you know, 15 years of therapy or intense behavioral work. So often we get reports on things that we're not necessarily even targeting. So somebody comes in and they come in because their kid's anxious and they say, so what's going on? Anything change? Anything new? No, you know, I really don't think anything's different. He stopped wetting the bed after 10 years, but besides that, he doesn't get car sick anymore. That one comes up surprisingly often, car sick. I'm not sure what, you know, how that works exactly. But because we're having generalized effects, we see changes that we don't necessarily anticipate because nervous systems are different one from another. So sometimes difficult to quantify, and we get those bonus changes from time to time. So things that we're looking at, if we are treating training at too high a frequency, sometimes we see these kinds of things. We're watchful for those, and we can adjust. We can back away from them. If we are training too low, sometimes we see these kinds of things. We can adjust. We can back away from them. That's part of the reason that we do 2 sessions a week, is so we have the opportunity to adjust and tweak something if it's going kind of in the wrong direction, if we're going too fast. But the longer we do this, the more skilled we get at it, and the more subtle the signs we're able to recognize. Okay. Questions about any of that? That's about as brief description of neurofeedback as you're likely to get. Wow.
I have a question.
Please.
After you've had the 20 sessions or however many of a neurofeedback and it's time to reassess, what's the decision that goes into, like, okay, we're going to keep going a little longer, or no?
So kind of, the question is, how do you make the decision about whether or not to continue after the first block of sessions? And I don't know that I have a definitive answer for that. For me, most of the time, it's a sense that, you know, we plateaued, that like my eye, you know, it's gone as far as it can go. We rarely get rid of 100% of migraines, for example. Almost never, in fact, I can't think of, not having had any effect on them. But if I get a sense of, you know, collecting data on pain ratings right along and how many days are functional and so on, and I'd say, I feel like we've hit a plateau here. And so we either have to change the protocol, and if I believe there's more to be gained by changing the protocol and doing more, then I'll discuss that with them, and it's a collaborative decision. I've had any number of patients who I have to tell them to stop. You know, and particularly those kids who have had some chronic kinds of things. Several times this happens with kids on the spectrum, where parents will say, this has helped more than anything else we've ever done. We want to keep going. And I have to say, well, yeah, but now we're at a point of diminishing returns, you know. They always think there's some, you know, other level out there. So I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but it's a kind of a collaborative decision with the patient or the parent. Please.
The example where they were showing the rocket ship and it either goes into a black fog or it
Yeah.
accelerates, is there anything you're telling the people, like, are you saying try to make it do something, or is the brain doing that?
They couldn't if they wanted to.
So they just sit there and it
We're
does
just,
it?
we're just trying to keep their mind occupied while we're
Okay.
talking to their brain.
Okay, so they're not cognitively or
No,
behaviorally
so most of it, I rarely use that system. Mostly what we do now is we show them a movie. So they get to pick out one of the 400 or 500 movies that we have, and while they're watching the movie, the screen shrinks. If they're going off in the wrong direction, it kind of grays out, the sound diminishes just a little bit. You saw the teddy bear in the chair earlier. The teddy bear is vibrating more or less in response to the EEG. You can think of that movie or that game or whatever as being the functional equivalent of what a capsule is to medicine. It's the carrier for the signal that we want to do. And I've had parents of difficult kids. Dr. Bryant in our practice, who's kind of semi-retired, I guess, is an autism specialist, and she's had a couple of patients she sent to me, and the parents come in and say, I don't think this is going to work. They can't sit still for more than 15 seconds to do anything, and they'll plop down in the chair. And their brain gets that there's something beneficial going on. Their mind, not so much, but their brain is there engaged with the process. So that's the level of communication. Sometimes kids will tell me, well, I was thinking about this then. I'm like, okay, think about whatever you want to think about. It's fine. Sure.
Volume too.
I'm sorry?
Doesn't the volume get louder and louder?
Yeah. So we're getting auditory feedback, visual feedback, and tactile feedback all at the same time, with the expectation that people respond differentially to different kinds of things.
Dr. Wright,
Yes.
the overall rate of success with patients in general and
Well, it kind of depends on how you're going to characterize success.
success.
Um,
Is there anybody for whom it doesn't work?
Yes, I've had failures, yeah. And those are the things that keep me trying to figure out what to do better, because I tend to think of that as I missed something, I took a wrong turn, I didn't measure the right variables.
Children versus adults, would you say they would?
I don't know that I have enough, I don't know that I have a good feel for that. Again, it's a pretty subjective kind of thing. If I were to say, how often do we have what I believe to be a meaningful, positive result for those people? Keeping in mind that very often we're not targeting specific behaviors, we're targeting improved functioning, and our expectation most often is that functioning continues to improve after we stop, because this is now a more adaptive organism. 80% maybe? I don't know, something like that. In line with what you would expect from a lot of therapies, right? If you talk to physicians, they're going to say most therapies are 70 to 80% effective. And I think that's kind of where we are too, except I think there's more ceiling for us as the technology improves, as the capacity to measure improves, and our understanding and experience improves. Please.
So I know you had mentioned that you're kind of trying to target like reactivity and instability, and it sounds like you're kind of trying to train the brain to change the wave patterns. Is that right? Or
Yes.
no? Okay. So what's kind of the proposed mechanism for change as far as like how neurofeedback affects the changes that you see with your patients?
It affects change the same way my visual cortex affects change. So answer, I don't know.
Okay.
It just does.
Okay.
How does reinforcement work?
I see what you're saying, yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
I know that it does, but the fact that I can say, well, reinforcement is reinforcing is a tautology, that doesn't tell me anything.
Right.
With the variable of medication, how do you approach the training with, if there's that confounding part?
So,
Does the brain do the work? How can you do the work when it has med?
medication, response to medication can often inform what we do. So if we say a person has responded favorably to a more sedating antidepressant, for example, that tells me I need to get over to the left prefrontal, because that function there, for whatever reason, is associated with some of the same things. So we touch on some of the same things. The young man, I didn't see him this week, he went out of town, so last week, who we have gradually weaned off of Zyprexa, which has horrible medical implications, and moved him from there to Geodon, which is less invasive, and now we're gradually weaning him off of Geodon, because we are able to touch on some of the same things. They're not directly analogous because they're different systems. So that can guide what we do, but also we can guide what the prescriber does. If we are unable to get a complete result or whatever, that can lead us to say, here's what we weren't able to get, here's what we were. Typically what we ask is that if the person is on medication, that we maintain whatever they're on while we're doing the neurofeedback. And then a fair percentage of the time, what we start to notice is they start to look over-medicated. And then we might go back to the prescriber and say, we think we can back down a little bit here. Let's try that and see if we can maintain functionality. Please?
Technology has a way of becoming usually more accessible and affordable over time.
Yep.
I know we're starting to see some biofeedback products on the market. You can buy them on Amazon, and I was wondering if you had considered the implications of that, and if you had any thoughts to share.
Yeah, I should get into the biofeedback equipment business.
So would you want your...
I do it all the time. I mean, I'm in private practice, so I need to make a living, right? I gotta keep the lights on and all of that. But ultimately, I'm in business because I wanna help people. And so I provide a list to people of apps, free apps that they can get that will support some of what we do. The tennis player that I mentioned to you, whom I saw earlier this week, has wanted to use an approach that we use that's more proprietary, so we will rent or sell equipment as the need arises. But I'm interested in giving things away because I like to feel that we're smart enough to be a couple of steps ahead, and as the technology improves, we're going to go to the front edge of it, and we're going to keep doing what we do. And the other thing is that not everybody who owns a hammer is a carpenter. Right, knowing how to use these tools to affect some positive purpose and knowing what the implication is, right? Anybody can train somebody how to do progressive muscle relaxation. Why are you doing that? What, how does that fit into our overall understanding of the individual? And if we can't do that, then I should probably buy a hammer and become a carpenter. Anybody else? Okay. Peripheral biofeedback. So what we're interested in doing here is training self-regulation skills to promote improved autonomic awareness in tone. We're interested in going from this to this. And what I'm going to give you is just kind of the basics of the rationale that I provide to my patients or to their parents. Human nervous systems do stuff, most of it, without our active involvement or awareness. Protecting us from harm or pain is a foundational nervous system function. If we are eaten by a tiger, it doesn't really make much difference whether or not we are able to do these other kinds of things, right? So our brains, our nervous systems, autonomically, and the interaction between the two are engaged in the process of identifying danger by changes in the environment and then figuring out how to keep us away from it. At the basic level, that means reflexive avoidance of noxious stimuli. At a deeper level, it involves memory, language, and so on. And what I'm doing there is starting to lay the foundation for later work that I'm going to do with ACT or relational frames kind of things. For many, your child, autonomic nervous system reactivity or imbalance is a primary contributor to poor self-regulation in its sex life. So people who are by nature wound up are more likely to be reactive to the environment. They're leaning in the direction of reactivity. I don't use the word sex life very often. Not even sure what it means. So there are two parts to the autonomic nervous system title, sympathetic and parasympathetic. They are usually antagonistic, but sometimes complementary. And that system manages, roughly speaking, 80% of our non-volitional or usually non-volitional body function. So things like waking and sleeping and digesting food and your heart beating and breathing and swallowing and salivating and all of those kind of things are managed quite nicely without you paying any attention to them at all. The sympathetic nervous system is the step on the gas, let's go, let's move, let's pay attention, let's make something happen part. It is a quick responder to stress. It mobilizes resources rapidly because if you are being chased by a lion, you don't need to stop and do a little calculus or some needlework, you need to go, you need to move. And so it sucks all of the resources, energy resources out of any remote place in your body that it can. It creates more oxygen, which is why people who have this breathing issue feel edgy because they got too much oxygen. More muscle tension, less digestion, less healing, less reproductive activity. Anything that's not going to happen in the next 2 minutes gets shut down. Because if you're in trouble, either the trouble is going to be over in the next 2 minutes or you are. And so you don't need to be worried about those other things, which is why chronic stress has an impact on people's health, because those systems shut down to deal with what is perceived to be an immediate problem. Release of stored energy facilitates action, and above a given threshold, up here, fight or flight. I think people are getting a little antsy. Let's take 5 minutes here, and then we'll hit the home stretch.